Welcome to the Cauldron of Curiosities. Good morning and welcome to the Cauldron of Curiosities. Today I realised that I had left things at a rather slow pace. I don't know about the rest of you, but I found that with the drought and the hotter weather, I probably wasn't as active as I normally would be. I would be having these bursts of activity in the morning while it was cool, and as soon as it started getting hot, I was finding other things to do. And in this person's life, the other things to do often was going out shopping to find things for my narrowboat. Those of you that might listen on a regular basis may recall that I bought a narrowboat. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about this today, because it's opened my eyes maybe even more into how the structure of society works and where you can get help and where things certainly haven't gone as smoothly as I would have liked them to. I first met Green Man on February the 1st, and in the pagan calendar, that's a significant day. It's Imbolc, and it's the first signs of change after a long winter, after the dark nights, and things are starting to improve. For some people, it's about fire and about maybe having a bit of a clear out. And is the battle over between winter and spring, or is that yet to come? But we're starting to see the snowdrops coming out. There's green shoots, and if there's snow, the green is definitely noticeable as it comes out of the snow. My first viewing of Green Man was interesting, I say, because you walk around, don't you? What is it when you walk around houses, boats, cars? The first view, you appear to have more of a blanket vision. You don't see any of the faults. You go in and you gain a sense of, is this environment something that I like? Do I like the colour scheme? What would I change immediately? And you've got all of these thoughts going through your head, haven't you, about whether this item or boat or car or house is suitable. And I have learnt from my mistakes and decided I would go back and have a second visit. And I took people back with me and we had a look. Generally, things appeared to be sound, and there were a few things that I wanted to remove. The carpet looked a bit grubby, and there was a very firm sofa in there that was not going to be part of my future life. Well, everybody tells you when you buy a boat that you should buy or pay for a survey. And a survey on a boat could cost anything from around about £600 upwards. So it's a significant amount of money, which means you really do need to be thinking to yourself, do I want to buy this boat or not? And if it's just a whimsical moment, maybe £600 won't be getting spent. But I remember reading through the paperwork that was provided by the surveyor, and essentially you wonder why you're bothering, because you're paying this person £600, £800, maybe more, to walk around and decide if the boat is fit for its purpose? And are there any key things that need to be changed before you buy it? And they do check the hull, and they also check the interior. But most of the small print within these contracts suggests that the person who's looking is human, they're not infallible, and therefore you can't really hold them to account on them missing things. So then when you think about that and you think, well, would you be better off getting someone who's just knowledgeable to come and have a look? Or would any human being with a hammer be able to come round and check those things? And what are the limits on maybe the boatyard taking the boat out of the water and you doing it yourself? Well, this is another bit of the money. To get the boat out of the water could cost you £250. So that adds to the bill, doesn't it? So every time you drag the boat out of the water, it's going to cost you £250, maybe more. Some places charge you more. So your bill's starting to rack up and you haven't actually decided whether you're going to put a bid in on the boat yet. Well, Green Man got the clean bill of health. There are a few bits and pieces that the surveyor recommended. One of them was to have a 2-pack epoxy coating done instead of blacking. Now, many of the yards that do the blacking would say, if you've had blacking, stick with the blacking, it works. It gets scraped off by the odd shopping trolley as you're floating around the canals. And then when you look into it, you find out that if you want to switch from a bitumen to the 2-pack, you actually have to have all the bitumen taken off because the 2-pack won't stick to the bitumen. So you have to find somewhere that does shot blasting. You may have seen this on one of the YouTube videos of where one of the people who had a narrowboat did go ahead and paid for the shot blasting. And this takes all the old bitumen off. It also will remove rust and takes the boat back to the bare steel. And then you can start again with the 2-pack system. You can't switch between bitumen and 2-pack. That means the suggestion in the report to go and have a 2-pack done was going to cost maybe £5,000-6,000 when you looked at all that would be involved and having the boat taken out of water, of course. So I took advice from a variety of people and decided not to go for the 2-pack. I decided to book in and have her blacked, because that's what she's had done in the past. Weirdly, she actually had rust down the port side, which I am not clear on how that might have happened when it didn't happen on the other side, unless she was always moored up on the port side and that was causing problems where she was rubbing up against, there's like these metal sections on the sides of the canals where you can moor. You may have seen them when you're walking along. So blacking varies in cost, depends on where you get it done. Some places charge more for it, but they tend to charge by the length of the boat, and most of them will give you an indicator of that on their website, or you can contact them and say, how much do you charge to have that done? Everything with narrowboats is done by length, so you get charged for your mooring by the length of your boat, and you get charged by your licence with the CRT by the length of your boat. One of the things that I did notice is CRT licence. If I wanted to pay in advance and get an annual licence, my licence would cost at the moment £1,200, maybe with the odd pound. Now, if I went, I can't afford that, I'm going to get a 6-month licence. Then the licence, it was £780. So we're looking at a significant amount of money extra because I can't afford the annual licence. Yeah? So there's another £1,000 out of your bank account. Because there is a saying called BOAT, BOAT, bring on another 1,000 for the things that need to be done. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, those are all things that you would have been expecting to have happen, and they were. Well, I went in for a bit of a rummage, as you do, and I had laid the steps down because I was looking in the cupboard, which is close to the stern bulkhead. And I lifted the steps up and I noticed that there are these dark marks on the carpet. So I'm busy looking around going, oh no, is there a leak in the ceiling? I'm looking, and then I put my hand down, realised these dark marks on the floor were from water. And there was a level of wetness. So I lifted up some of the tiles and found there was this cardboard stuff underneath, which had been used for insulation, and it was absolutely soaking wet. It was falling apart. It was so wet. So I thought, oh no. Started lifting as many of the tiles out of the way because I thought these are going to need to dry out. And this is one of the things that didn't get noticed by the surveyor, that there was a massive leak and that the central heating system wasn't working properly. And I don't know, part of me thought he would have checked that as part of the system check. And he'd recently had what they call a boat's safety survey. Well, that didn't pick up the leak either. So, yeah, that was a bit of a, oh, how much is this going to cost me? As it turned out, they said, oh, we can't get the parts for fixing the central heating, the thing that has gone wrong. So I ended up having a diesel heater system put in. That has benefits in so much as I'm not using as much gas, but it means I need to have diesel in the tank, and diesel in the tank means you need to take your boat to the place to get the diesel, or maybe have several jerry cans and fill up from the jerry cans, because that's an option too, but you're not going to want to do that on a windy day. Because that's one of the things I have found, trying to do things on the outside of Greenman on a windy day does make you wonder if you're going to end up in the canal getting a little bit wet, because the narrow boats, they're like these steel sails. When it comes to a windy day, they really do get pushed around by the wind. And I've seen very competent boatmen struggle to move boats when the wind is catching the bow end. It's possibly one of the reasons why somebody came up with the idea of the bow thrusters, because it gives you more control of the bow of your boat. There were even discussions on Canal World around how windy is it that you might choose not to carry on cruising that day or go out. I'm guessing, because I don't actually know this from personal experience, that leaving a mooring on the cut when it's windy might be not as bad if you're in a sheltered area. But then I'm assuming, with the way the wind can blow, is that you could find yourself being blown back into the bank all the time. And so you won't be able to get your bow out into the centre of the canal because the wind's pushing you in. So that could be a bit of a problem, couldn't it? Anyway, I certainly had an experience trying to manoeuvre Green Man around the marina, and it is a horrible feeling when you lose control of the bow of your boat because the wind decides it's gusting along and you just watch it shifting, and it's just so stressful to see. Oh, what do I do? How do I counteract that? And the only thing you can do is practice it. Or I don't know. They say, yeah, it's practice, isn't it? Isn't that the way with so many things in life? That there's no quick route to it. You just got to keep having a go at doing it. Especially if you've got no choice and you've got to go out and take your boat round to have it blacked. You've got to go out in that wind because you've got to be there in an hour or two. So, yeah, super levels of anxiety. I was so stressed because I saw the front end sweeping round towards someone else's boat, and I knew I didn't actually have any control of that, and trying to get control back was a bit hairy, to say the least. But we got there in the end, and I moved her back on a much calmer day. There was less wind, and I actually took it a lot slower, and I learnt a few things about manoeuvring her using the points of leverage, which was helpful. And especially when you're in a tight space and you don't have the capacity for using the engine movement, because sometimes if it's quite tight you might actually have to use the end of a mooring to lever you round, and that's what I had to do that when I brought her back. So what did I end up spending money on next, you might ask? The flooring. So remember when I said I had to lift up the tiles? So I lifted all the tiles up, lifted all this weird cardboard stuff, which was absolutely soaking wet, put it all into bin bags, found another layer of carpet tiles underneath, and they were all soaking wet as well, lifted those all up. And in the end, when I looked at the state of these, it went all the way up to the living area, the wetness, but I ended up pulling up all the carpet tiles. For some period of time, we ended up with just the plywood. So whilst I was painting Green Man, we lived with the plywood floor. I say we lived with, I put up with it, she put up with the plywood floor. I didn't actually live on board because she wasn't, she still had things that needed doing. Because the bathroom needed doing as well, the sink had a hole in it, and there was a crack in the plastic which had to be replaced. And we ended up changing radiators and bits and pieces like that. So it all added in. So the next big expense was having some flooring put down. I did consider carpet, but I've got a dog and I didn't think that would be the best route, especially as I didn't really want to be hoovering all the time, because I want to keep things on mainly 12 volt, and carpets do need to be hoovered. I went for engineered wood flooring. I did actually look into this quite a bit, and do you know what? It's a little bit like arseholes. Everybody's got an opinion about what type of flooring works. Some people have used reclaimed wood, so they've done a solid wood floor, even though there's a lot of opinion out there that says solid wood floors will swell and shift and don't work in a boat environment, but people have used them. And if you think about it, there are boats out there that have solid wood floors. They've been designed that way, and they're beautifully planked and they haven't shifted. But anyway, I listened to the weight of opinion and went for the engineered wood. I did not realise that engineered wood is quite as shabby as it is. It's got, even the well-known makes do not look anything like the piece they give you to look at in the showroom. I did choose to get someone to lay the floor for me, because when I thought about doing all the measurements, cutting it, having to buy the tools to do the work, it actually worked out cheaper to have someone lay the floor. It wasn't as expensive as one of them. I was quoted over £1,000 to have the floor laid by one particular place, so I didn't end up going with them. I wasn't quite sure why it was going to cost £1,000 for the actual work, because it was maybe a day's work laying the floor. If anybody's got any thoughts on why that would have been such a high cost, I would be interested to know. But that's a big amount of money, isn't it? Just to lay the floor. I tell you, and when I thought that was going to be the only option of it was going to be in the region of £1,000 to lay a floor, I did actually seriously think, did I have the kahunas to be able to do the floor myself? And I was sitting there going, I'm going to get my daughter to help me because she's better at straight lines than I am. And I have an astigmatism which really does seem to affect my ability to draw a straight line, let alone cut one. But I do have one of those blocks that allows you, you can put things in it and it helps you cut angles. I need to find one that's got at least a 4-inch gap in it. I don't know if they do those. I might have to go to B&Q one day and have a look and see if B&Q has them. Because one of the things with boats is there's angles everywhere. So you have an angle that tips out towards the gunwale or the gunwale, which is underneath. So the bottom half of the boat, the very bottom is like a narrower point and it widens. So you've got this slope, which is on an angle of about, it's a 2-inch difference, roughly. Then above the gunwale, you've got another angle, and that is about 4 to 5 inches on Green Man, the gap. And that is significant. So if you were trying to hang anything and keep it straight, use anything that had been used in, in a standard kitchen, for example, it just won't fit without you creating this huge wedge behind it. So at some point, I am going to need to work out how to cut those angles myself. And yes, I did try to find a carpenter. Carpenter number 1 was a bit of a disaster. So he said he would get some storage steps done. And that was good. He came to have a look. He charged us to come and do the viewing. And he took all the measurements, wrote them down in his notebook. Yeah, I can get that done by that date. So he said, I'll have something for you by the end of next week. Well, I contacted him. I sent him a text message. How are you getting on? Silence. Then I get a phone call. I haven't actually started on it yet. I've been on another job. I said, you never said you were on another job. So at this stage, I was thinking, it's not worth it. So I said, well, maybe you can give me my deposit back. Oh, I've already bought the materials, he says. So I say, okay, fine. I'd need you to let me know where you're at with it. And he's saying, he was struggling with the heat, and that's fair enough, but he still took my money. So there's various viewpoints on that, aren't there? How serious or what sort of mug did he think I was when he's taking my money and not doing the work? He never mentioned when he came to do the survey that he had other jobs in hand. Well, we eventually get really close to the date where I'm moving Green Man and I need these steps to have arrived, and he still hasn't done them. He's actually contacting me saying, do you want a back panel on your steps? And I was like, yeah, why wouldn't I have one? And then he asked, did I want to have a floor on the steps? And I said yes, because the steps will be having to be moved out of the way because there's a cupboard beside them, and to get in the cupboard the steps need to be moved. So if it didn't have a floor on, anything I was storing in those steps is going to fall on the floor. And then it comes back, or he comes back and says, oh, well, some people do blah, blah, blah. They don't have a base in it, blah. And I said, well, maybe they don't move their steps. I already told you when you came to do the survey that I would be moving the steps. You saw the cupboards. And he was meant to be building me a sliding door cupboard at the side. Well, he never actually started doing the cupboard. So after this conversation around the floor and the base and everything, he decides that he's not going to make the cupboard for me because he hasn't done it. He's not going to be delivering that item. So we make an arrangement for him to deliver the steps. Now, his ultimate deadline was for Friday. We're having this conversation about the cupboard and the steps having the back and the bottom on the Tuesday of that week. And so he hadn't even cut out the cupboard stuff. How was he going to get that done in 3 days when he hadn't done it in the previous 3 weeks? But he had had my deposit. I don't know. So I actually started looking at, okay, what's going on here is around my boundaries that I was setting in my conversations, and where was I being clear? What I did realise was we had a communication clash, because I would send a text message and he wouldn't reply in a text. He would want to ring me. And I would ask, can you please put that in writing? Because I thought, you know what, something that smelt off. So, and he did not want to put it in writing. He kept leaving me these little voice messages. And so, yeah, he possibly had his own learning requirements that meant he found it easier to leave a voice message. I've got friends who would prefer to do that as well. But when somebody specifically says to you, please, can you explain to me in writing what it is, or send me a picture, I said, can you send me a photograph of what exactly you are talking about? But the communication breakdown was pretty strong. So probably just as well that we chose not to go with having a sliding door cabinet. Well, he brings the steps along, and I look at the steps and there's a gap at the back. And I said, why is there a gap at the back? And he had no good reason. for leaving a 6-inch gap, because if anything, stuff could fall out the back of it, which was ridiculous. And on further inspection, we realised that he had made mistakes cutting the side pieces and had glued the bits he'd cut in error back in, not screwed in, they were glued in, and then slapped some wood filler over the top. So it was all pretty scruffy and not what I'd paid for, because I paid premium bespoke for a carpenter to make these steps to fit my narrowboat. And when you looked at the angle that he had cut, he hadn't used the measurements he had taken. It was a random wedge cut out the back to accommodate the skirting. It did not engage with the skirting size on the boat at all. And again, another disappointment. So we ended up having further conversations around my expectation and whether he thought he'd done a good job. And I said no, I didn't think so, especially when I spotted the glue inserts. But it's really difficult, isn't it? Because why, if you're selling yourself as a bespoke carpenter, why don't you just do what you're advertising yourself? Now, if you're saying, oh, I'm a DIY enthusiast, I love making these as a hobby, be honest about that. And I suppose all of this, when I look at it and look back at some of the things that I found out with Green Man, is there was a complete lack of honesty going on. People weren't being upfront. People weren't providing all the facts, or maybe they didn't see all the facts. And sometimes there'll be someone somewhere who say, well, maybe they didn't know, maybe they didn't see it. And that's why they didn't tell you. But is that always the truth? There's a part of me that's got a cynical ear or eye and says, really? Really? How did they not know that? Especially if it's their job or their profession to be good, to be expert. And because we've got an expectation, haven't we, as human beings? If somebody labels themselves as an expert, especially if they've got lots of certificates, that they're capable of doing the thing. But I suppose you could have all the certificates and the university accolades, but you may not have been doing the job that often. And you might not have done that particular thing recently. That's a thought, isn't it? And I can think of a few examples of that, where that has gone wrong in certain industries, where people are selling themselves based on their past experiences. I suppose it'd be a bit like when I was 16, which is a long time ago, I did have a phase where I worked as a nanny. It was around about 6 months. And I call myself a nanny, but I wasn't qualified. But essentially, I was a cheap nanny. I was a mother's help. And the problem with mother's helps is you did the nanny duties, getting paid less, and you had to do all the housework. So they were getting more out of you for less money because you didn't have your NNEB. Would I offer myself to go and work for someone looking after their kids, doing a similar thing as that now? Would I be capable? Probably not. I may have more patience now. Some people might say that's not necessarily true, but maybe parts of it would work out okay. But would I have that capacity to go and work in someone else's home? Maybe not. But it's weird, isn't it? Because I suppose when we look at the amalgam of all the things that we know and our skills, there are things we learnt when we were younger that we can still do now, because we haven't lost that ability, especially if we were doing them on a regular enough basis that it became ingrained. And one of the things that I can do now that I did as a job was silver service. So I can still use a spoon and fork to pick up food. But I haven't done that as a job for a long time. So yeah, maybe I'm talking around myself because there are certain things that I can still do. So where do we draw the line on that then? Where do we draw the line where we say, well, you haven't done that job for 20 years. That means you can't do it. Is that true? Does that mean you're not competent? And who came up with these ideas around currency, competency, qualifications? And because it's a bit of a money spinner, isn't it? And I've gone full circle around, but the upshot of it is there's not many carpenters out there. And then the second carpenter that I spoke to said, oh, I'll pop round at the weekend. Needless to say, he didn't. And I just wasn't in the mood for chasing this weekend. So no carpenter's been. So we're going to leave that section, the carpentry bit, and I will possibly have a ponder on what I could possibly do myself regarding carpentry. And let me know if you're interested in finding out about what I've been getting up to with Green Man. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Cauldron of Curiosities. Don't forget to follow the podcast, share it with a friend, and keep your lantern handy for the next curious tale.